Well, Judy Norton, is this true? You made your movie debut when you were 9 in Arthur Haley's Hotel with this incredible cast. Rod Taylor, Merle Oberon, Mervyn Douglas, Carl Malden was in the mix.
Yes. I mean, I had no idea who any of those people were, of course, because I was so young.
Yes.
But I do remember my mother taking me to the set and she was she's like, there's Merle Oberon. And I'm, of course, like, who is that? And needless to say, years later, I was like, oh my goodness. The cast that I did work with were really kind to me. Michael Rennie sat and played old maid with me, card game. I mean, who does that with a child? So they were so sweet to me.
So step me back to the beginning, Judy. How did you wind up becoming an actor?
I don't know whether it was driven more by my mother, but my father was the one who implemented it. I have a brother and sister, and when we were young, my sister and I initially had dance lessons, like a lot of little girls. Mm-hmm. And then there was a point where my dad got for me and my sister an acting coach. So we started doing little acting lessons. And he, I think, was working with somebody whose children were doing some sort of work. And whether it was my kids are as good as your kids, and if your kids can do it, mine can do it, something like that. He researched and found out how one goes about getting an agent, and just kind of took the various different steps on our behalf. And we got an agent and started auditioning. And early on, there used to be an extras guild for background work, and he signed us up for that. And I remember doing background work in commercials or films or things like that. And those were some of my first experiences on sets. So it kind of started there, and then with the agent starting to audition, and you don't get hired more than you get hired, but which was kind of my early experience. And then one thing led to another. I got some roles, and history.
Along comes a series now, 50 years on, still so loved. We're talking, of course, the Waltons, you, Mary Ellen. Tell me, were you up against a lot of other child stars at audition?
Definitely. There was a core of young girls, we same age range, that went up for all sorts of different roles, whether they were TV series or guest spots in shows or movies. So I would see a lot of the same faces. Because of the way the audition process goes, you don't always know everybody. You're not always there at the same time as everybody else who might be auditioning. So how many little girls they saw, or 13-year-olds they saw for that, I don't know. I know there were a few that I would see regularly that I know auditioned. It was, I had lost out on a number of roles to some of these other girls. So I was very glad that this was the one that I got.
Mary Ellen, of course, she was feisty. She was strong-willed. Was there a little of you in that character? Were you back then strong-willed and feisty and kind of outspoken?
I was starting to find that part of myself. I had not been earlier. I found it very intimidating as a young child auditioning. In fact, we mentioned the movie Hotel. In that audition, because there was no dialogue, what they did was there was maybe 10 or 12 of us that were brought into a room, and we stood in a semicircle in front of probably the director, maybe the casting director, I'm not sure who else. And they just kind of looked at all of us, like whether it was they were going for a look or a type or whatever. Most of the other little girls knew somebody else. So they were all kind of chatting with each other. And I was just kind of standing by myself because I didn't know anybody, and I was feeling very shy and self-conscious. Well, maybe that's what got me the role. But I used to joke about that the roles I got were always for very frightened children, because I feel like that's what I projected when I went into the room, was I was kind of a little scared and intimidated by the situation. So that would play into certain types of characters that I would get cast for. So in this case, I was just kind of hitting my teens and starting to feel a little cocky. And I had been into sports. I was a tomboy, as well as the dance. I also have always done sports and stuff. So I loved being active. So the whole tomboy thing was very comfortable for me. So it was a character I think I related to, which made it a little easier to just go in there. And for me, it was also fortunate that the scene we auditioned with was one that really featured Mary Ellen. For people who are familiar with The Homecoming, there's a whole scene where we're cracking walnuts and Mary Ellen is going off on a rant. And that was the audition scene. So it gave me an opportunity to, I think, showcase and shine at something that was in my wheelhouse. So that definitely helped.
The Waltons celebrated its 50th anniversary this past September. It must feel really great to be part of TV history, and you are part of TV history.
It's still something that seems a little unreal to me because I go about my daily life and I have a pretty normal life. I have never really lived in the spotlight or lived a Hollywood life. So to me, it's sometimes I just kind of chuckle and think, wow, I'm part of television history. I am in anything that's going to talk about the history of Hollywood or television will include the Waltons. So that's kind of hard to grapple with sometimes. I joked about, we just had an event at the Hollywood Museum, an exhibit of the Waltons that will be there for 6 months. I said, well, you stick around long enough, they put you in the museum, Yeah, we all kept saying, this is a little like a Twilight Zone episode, because we were standing in front of these glassed in cases of our fake figures wearing costumes from the show. And Richard's like, yeah, it's like an episode where you come back and we're all inside the glass case personally on exhibit.
You think of the Waltons, and it was so renowned for those dinner scenes where everybody gets together and the turkey and the mashed potatoes and all of that. I mean, those scenes take hours to film. What was the turkey and the mashed potatoes and the peas like at the end of it?
At the beginning of the day, when it's all nice and fresh and you've come in and you're going, oh, I'm hungry, and you want to eat it all. And then you quickly learn to moderate it, because you're going to have to be matching that. And every time the camera's on you, you're going to have to do that again. So we became masters of cutting endlessly. Oh, or Michael Lerner joked about how she said, I dare you to find an episode where you ever see me take an actual bite of food. And I have on my YouTube channel where we talk about various different things behind the scenes of the Waltons. It's a little running thing where people, because I've told that story that people, I saw her take a bite. It's like the Where's Waldo? It's like people are like looking to spot when Michael actually took a bite of something. So there were rare moments where it certainly looked like food went in her mouth, and I don't remember her spitting it out after the take. So I think occasionally, but it's so rare, it is like finding lost treasure.
The other thing is, Judy, George H.W. Bush very famously said, America needs to be more like the Waltons and less like the Simpsons. I mean, that goes to show the incredible impact the Waltons had.
I think it did represent an ideal for many of us, myself included. I think it was that role model of a family and an era and a community. I think there was characters that everybody could relate to at any age of your life. And I've had people say that starting off, they were maybe the age of the children, but now they are the age of the grandparents. So now when they watch the episodes along the years, they have related differently from being, oh, I'm just like Ben, or I'm just like Mary Ellen, to, well, now I'm kind of like mama or daddy, and oh, now I'm like grandma or something. So we depicted real life situations, a family that went through hard times, but did their best to live with honesty, integrity. They were welcoming and accepting of all people, even if they weren't sure about them. They did their best to not judge or be willing to be proven wrong if they judged unfairly and found out that whatever they were projecting on somebody wasn't who that person really was. So I think those were important messages for all of us in any time period. And I think that is one of the reasons it has endured so well, is perhaps we don't live in the same exact period, but so many of these things are still aspects of our life and things we struggle with even today. And it was, a story of triumph for this family through difficult times.
And by and large, Judy, and you can see this, it comes through, you can't fake it. It was clearly a very happy show to work on.
Absolutely. As I have been interviewing different people who guest star on the show for my YouTube channel, just this morning, I was talking to Deborah White, who did 2 episodes, The Chivalry and the Loss. And she talked about, of all the work she did over the years, that it was the highlight of her career, that working on the Waltons, that it was just such a warm, fun, embracive set to be on. And I've heard that from any number of people that came in and guest starred, that it was clear that we all loved each other and got along, that permeated then to the crew, the cast. I think for the most part, the crew was happy too. We were a nice, pleasant show to work on. It wasn't all perfect. And, there was certainly, there was drama here and there. But I mean, even within us, it felt like a family. We are still a family. We consider it family time when we get to spend time together.
And it's a very strange atmosphere when you've got a whole lot of actors together and everybody's doing their thing. Of course, from time to time, there's going to be issues. I know, of course, Eric Scott, he was your TV brother, Ben. He spoke out to say, look, at times, not all the time, but at times, sometimes you kids did feel maybe a little underappreciated. The point to that story is the magnificent Michael Learned, she'd get flowers and things from producers after maybe an especially grueling day on the set. And she said, what about these kids? They've worked their backsides off. And, it's not often you get somebody sticking up for you in that kind of environment.
I've learned more as the years have gone on, because I think during the time of the show, I mostly saw it from my perspective, because that's what, when you're young, I think you're more absorbed in your own world than necessarily looking at the big picture. So, it all makes a lot more sense to me now. But as children, and particularly in that era, children very rarely carried shows. Usually it was a show about the adults and the children were peripheral. The Waltons really was an ensemble cast, even though, Richard, the character of John Boy, was the star, and the parents and then the grandparents. So we were sort of fourth down the pecking order. And I think there was always a sense of trying to keep us in line. We don't want them being difficult. We just want to do their job. And so there were times definitely where you could feel underappreciated. Some of their, I think, negotiation tactics were to sort of say, well, you should be happy to have a job and we can replace you. Those types of things don't really make you feel warm and fuzzy that
Right.
Your work is appreciated. And it was not everyone. Earl Hamner was quite lovely, who created the show. But whether that was, again, a negotiating tactic, or whether it just happened to be a couple of the personalities of people that we had to interact with whose job it was to be the bad guy. But yeah, I mean, it was what it was.
That's it.
Fortunately, because we all really got along well, it wasn't what we dwelled on. So I know I went through my rebellious periods where, I tried to push the issue. I should be, but I think as a teenager, that's, again, not unusual. I think, there were others that I think Eric used to get in trouble, some of us.
But I do think after one of those kind of gripes about feeling a little undervalued or underappreciated, you did get a basket of muffins or something. So, it's nice to be grateful, isn't it?
It is. Yes, one must appreciate, that. But
I know.
I appreciate that Ralph and Michael and Richard and, that the adults did go to bat for us, and they did their best to try to support us in ways that maybe we didn't even know about at the time. And, they did have a lot of, they were carrying a lot as well in what their responsibilities were in the show. And early on, they really pushed to set the tone of the show and make sure that the scripts were the best they could be when they went to table readings, and really pushing for the quality of the show. And I think that doing that, which probably helped the show last as long as it did, is probably one of the best gifts. They gave us more time together, more time with the show, instead of letting it be trivialized or become too cutesy or sentimental, or, because the audience knows, they've got a pretty good ability to watch something and say, oh, I buy this, or this isn't real. That would never happen. And I think that we managed to make it look and feel like real life experiences and real people, as opposed to a bunch of actors pretending. We didn't go hokey with it. They weren't hillbillies. They lived in the country. They might not be sophisticated, but they were real people, and they were good, honest, hardworking people. And I think that represents a majority of the people around the world. So I think it's an underrepresented population often, and particularly to be the heroes of a show.
Do you keep in touch with most of your co-stars now?
Absolutely. I mean, several of us saw each other at this museum event last week. And I mean, we do whenever we can. A couple months ago, I went up to San Francisco to see Richard Thomas, and he's touring in To Kill a Mockingbird. Mm-hmm. We're very protective of that family time where we can just not be working, and not be characters, but just be us.
Richard Thomas, of course, we know, John Boy, the eldest of the 7 kids, fabulous prankster. How did you find him to work with, and what's he like now when you catch up?
He is one of the most generous, kind actors to work with, and people to work with. He's committed. He's passionate about what he does. He manages to stay out of the drama, which I really admire. He just kind of, he's pretty much always in good humor. Mm-hmm. He's kind to his fellow actors, as well as the average person on the street who might come up and want an autograph or a picture. Doing scenes, I always loved the dynamic between Mary Ellen and John Boy, because being the oldest brother and the oldest sister, we had a lot of little spats and bickering and stuff, which were such fun scenes to play. And he always brought so much to the table, whether he was on camera or off camera for my close-up. He just 100%. So I love him dearly. He's very special in my life, and I'm just grateful to still have him in my life.
Of course, John Walmsley, of course, who was Jason.
John lives in John's little universe is kind of what I can see. He sort of marches, which is appropriate being a musician. He kind of marches to his own drum. Yes. Incredibly talented as a singer, songwriter, and actor, but his passion is really the music. A perfectionist. He's very, particularly with the music, he's, he really knows his stuff. He kind of, Eric joked about how he's often the slowest of the group. So if we'd be all ready to head for lunch, and it would be like, we're waiting for John. And there he is. And he's strolling along like no concept of the time, and, but not worried about anything.
Eric Scott, of course, who was Ben, who I think runs a very successful courier company now.
Started off as a driver for the company, worked his way up into sales, and ultimately bought the company. I adore Eric. Eric used to drive me crazy during the series because he was always at 150. Many of us are not morning people, and we'd have very early calls, and I'd be in the makeup chair just, trying to ease into the day, and Eric would come bursting in at full volume, and it was like just Oh no, too much, too loud, too early. Just big and boisterous. And
Yes.
so there were times he just drove me crazy, but I adore him. He's come to be one of my, closest castmates.
Mary Elizabeth McDonough, of course, who was Erin.
Yes.
She, much like you, kind of heart and soul of the show, wasn't she, along with Richard Thomas?
She's incredibly sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
She was probably the one I was closest to in the later years of the series, because we're about 3 years apart. So by the time we were into later seasons, we were the two girls closest in age. Yeah. She and I would travel together. We took a cruise together. We would go out and fly to where each of us might be doing a show and hang out. So she was probably one of my closest confidants, and at times still is. So yeah, she's a sister.
David Harper, of course, who was Jim Bob, the youngest son. Was he cheeky? Was he a rascal? What was he like to work with?
He could be. He's sort of our lone wolf. He's an old soul. He's one of those that still waters run deep, probably suits, not fairly quiet, fairly introspective. So he just kind of went about his business. I mean, he was one of the younger ones, so he and Cammie would go and play and stuff. But he was kind of one that we all felt a little protective of as sort of the younger one, and where Cammie was very precocious and never met a stranger. David was a little more, he could be overlooked at times by people, but just such an incredible natural talent.
Yes.
He just had a simplicity to the work that he did that just broke my heart at times on screen, because it was just so simple but powerful.
Cammie Cotler, of course, you just mentioned. And I saw...
Yeah, she was the baby, so she would get all the attention, and that was irritating at times. It's like, you're 12 years old, you don't need to be carried around anymore.
I saw her being interviewed by you in one of your behind the scenes episodes on YouTube, which was lovely. You clearly still had that fabulous dynamic together.
Because she was so young when we started, the relationship with her has probably changed more than with any of the kids, because at 13 and she was 7, or 14 and 7, those are very different. I wasn't going to be necessarily interested in playing with her because my interests were different, but but as we've gotten older, I've now gotten to know her as an adult, because she was barely an adult when we finished. She was just about 18. So now, knowing her as a grown-up, I just so admire her, and her perspective is always unique and interesting to me.
And what do you say about the great Michael Learned as your mum, Olivia?
She's very layered. She is one of the most compassionate people you'll ever meet. She feels very deeply about things, and she's irreverent. I think sometimes she's the one nowadays that is most likely to blurt something out that we're like, I can't believe you said that, Michael. She and Ralph together, they were I think that relationship of John and Olivia Walton is the quintessential, marriage. I just think that, if someone can have a marriage like that, there's nothing better. The way in which they were clearly, as a couple, still in love, still romantic, and that you saw that love between those characters. And from Michael's own words, the only reason that she felt she could play all of that was because of the respect and love they had for each other in real life. Although never romantic, it was a very deep and lifelong love they had for each other. And I think that they did help each other through some difficult times. Because we were younger, I don't think the children were able to be there for them in the way that they could be there for each other, because there was just too much age difference early on. Now I think as we've gotten older that my relationship with Michael has changed, and we've been able to share more conversations about life and relationships and parenting and all kinds of things, because I have more life experience now. But, looking back and realizing the things that she was having to juggle during the show, raising 3 boys on her own, and that pull of being on set for so many hours, and knowing that, here she is being this wonderful parent to all these children that aren't really hers, and feeling like her own children are not getting the time and attention that she wants to be giving them. And she tells a very funny story about one time around her own kitchen table with her 3 boys, that there was bickering and stuff going on. And one of them turned to her and said, "Why can't you be more like you are on the Waltons?"
Now, the wonderful Will Geer, of course, is Grandpa Walton. Do you have fond memories of working with him?
Will was bigger than, he was larger than life. He was very much in real life like the character of Grandpa. He loved people. He was always interested in new experiences, meeting new people. And he would take people under his wing. He would, maybe because of being blacklisted in the McCarthy era, he recognized the struggle within other, particularly young actors who were trying to come to Hollywood and break in. So he would open up his, he has a compound in Topanga, where he sort of retreated to when he couldn't work in Hollywood. And he planted gardens everywhere he went. He planted the garden on the back lot. The Walton garden was one that Will planted and took care of during filming. So he would do that in his own life. He would nurture young talent. Someone wanted to come out to Hollywood, he'd say, "Come stay at my compound." And, every time I went out doing interviews anywhere around the country or anything, people always said, "Oh, Will Geer was here." It's like, of course he was. He knew so much. He that infused his character and also himself in real life. I mean, I don't know that I always could relate to him as a teenage girl. He was sort of a little like an alien subject to me. I mean, I kind of was like, I don't get this, person. So there were times where maybe I wasn't as close to him as I was to Ellen, but I think that was more the teenage girl thing, and that I was at that age in my life probably more comfortable with the women, struggling to find my own transition from teen to adult.
Now, the great Ellen Corby, of course, Oscar nominee, an incredible career before the Waltons and after. Was she kind of like a surrogate grandma or something? Did she have that warm, empathetic, way about her?
She was incredibly professional, and she was always working to, I think, mentor many of us. I certainly felt that way about her, that she wanted to instill that sense of professionalism in all of the younger cast. And even I think there were times where, to the degree that she felt she could, that she would maybe take Michael or Ralph to task if she thought they were, maybe getting a little too far off base. But Cammie talks a lot about, Ellen sitting next to her at the table and instructing her in ways about how to behave on the set, because Cammie was so young. And because I'd already done a fair bit of work, and I'd also done a lot of theater already by the time I came to the Waltons. So I already sort of, I think, understood a certain level of professionalism from doing that, and often being the only child in an adult company. So she always sort of said that I reminded her of herself, which I really was honored to hear. So she definitely gave me a lot of good advice, and I was close to her.
Hollywood kind of saw you as Mary Ellen, right? Refused to see you outside of that kind of frame. Was it difficult for you to sort of shatter that teen star mold and say, that was a role, I'm now ready for my next one?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that happens anytime. I mean, it's the blessing and the curse of creating a really iconic character, that's really successful, is that then that's how people see you and how people want to see you. And they don't necessarily, I mean, I still hear that with people, Richard Thomas. It's like, oh, if he plays some really bad character, it's like, they're not sure he's a good actor, but they're not really sure that that's how they want to see him. And of course, as an actor, you're always looking for a new challenge. You don't necessarily want to play the same role over and over, even in another show, new show, same character. So it can be a definite challenge if you want to branch out more. So, what I kind of finally figured out is you just have to get more creative about what you're doing, and, and recognizing that some doors get closed and others are open. So find the open ones.
And your manager came up with quite the plot to shake things up in your life, and that was to suggest you pay a visit to Playboy.
I mean, it was something that a number of actresses had done. And, I sort of felt a little like, well, actresses are being asked to do varying degrees of nudity on camera all the time. At least this is still photography, So I wasn't necessarily so personally concerned about it, but I think, and I had a couple of different representatives advise me that was something I should do. And we were into an era in the 80s of glamour. And, Mary Ellen was never considered glamorous. So it was sort of like, that was sort of the concept. This is the kind of work that's being done. So, you need to somehow be able to be considered as someone who could do that kind of work. So it's like, okay, this is the second or third person who's kind of advised me that I should do this. And I went, okay. And, I wouldn't, there were aspects of that long range decision that never occurred to me. There's things that sometimes it's difficult to say. It's easy to say afterwards, oh, if I'd known then what I know now. But sometimes you can't project ahead to know every question you should ask or every angle on something. I mean, fortunately, the Waltons turned out to be a great thing. If it hadn't, I could be sitting there, oh, well, if I'd only thought blah, blah, maybe I wouldn't have done the Waltons, So, I try not to regret things, but, there's certainly things along the way that I say, were I to go back and now and face that choice, knowing a bit more, I don't think I would have made the choice, just because it didn't accomplish anything worthwhile. It really didn't accomplish anything. It's sort of like, okay, well, that was pointless. So why bother? So, live and learn.
Away from the Waltons, a very varied career, both on screen and stage. You've trodden the boards for decades. A favorite play?
Probably the musicals that I've done. I love doing musical theater. Probably doing Annie, Get Your Gun.
Mm-hmm.
Similar character to Mary Ellen, another sort of tomboy, another, strong female character. Loved that. And anytime I get to combine two things I love, singing and acting, I'm a happy camper.
A writer and a director as well, a lot of layers to your life. An athlete, we touched on this at the beginning, but I mean, not just an athlete, not just a very active person, Judy. I mean, like, you're a daredevil. You got 2 skydiving world records under your belt.
Yep. It was really scary the first time, but then it very quickly becomes just exhilarating. The wonderful thing about skydiving, about free fall, is that's all you can think about in that 60 to 75 seconds that you're out there. Mm-hmm. You're incredibly focused because you have to be, and it just snaps you right into the present. And it's quite exhilarating. And so then it gets to be, okay, great, good. The doors are open. Let's go,
I read somewhere a wing walker. I'm imagining that's walking along the wings of a plane that's up there in the sky. Is that right?
Not really. I did that for Circus of the Stars, and what it was is it was a climbing out of the front seat, because the pilot flies from the back seat. So climbing out up onto the top wing where there was a brace, a bracket up there, and then strapping into this bracket while the pilot flew aerobatics. So it's very grueling. That's not something I'd make a habit of doing, because there's so much wind pressure against you that it's physically grueling to do. And there's moments where it's fun, but I was always glad to be back down on the ground.
Now, we are in the holiday season now. You just mentioned the fact that two of your greatest loves are the stage and singing, so combining that and the great musicals. You have a new CD, Home for Christmas, it's called.
It is, which I have right here. Let's see.
How fantastic.
This was a COVID project. When everything shut down and there were so many things that I couldn't do. I was supposed to be about to go direct a film, and of course that couldn't happen, and auditions weren't happening, and theater wasn't happening. And I was like, well, okay, what can I do? And I've always loved Christmas. I've always loved Christmas music. And it was something I'd always wanted to do, was record a Christmas CD. So I thought, this is something I can do during COVID. So I just finished it and released it, right kind of towards the beginning of November. So I'm very excited to, to have that out, to be able to share with people for this holiday season. Yes.
Now, people can find this on your Judy Norton website.
Yes, hard copies available there, or it's on pretty much all the streaming things. If you
Excellent.
stream stuff, Apple Music, iTunes, Spotify, so it's pretty much, if you have a favorite platform, chances are it's there.
Judy, with nostalgia being such a thing still, has there ever been talk of maybe the original cast all getting together for another movie go round, or a TV special, or something like that? A reboot of the Waltons, perhaps?
CW did a remake of The Homecoming last year with a whole new cast. And then they just did an original new Waltons Thanksgiving story, which I haven't seen yet. So I think they're looking at hoping to reboot the series with a whole new cast, which, I understand we're too old to rehash that. Whether it finds a new audience, it's obviously has a different tone, because it's now we're at this point in time, and it's CW, who has a different demographic and a different style. Someone said recently they didn't think that you could recreate the show the way we did, because you couldn't financially do it. We were shot on 35mm film. We were closer to the era, so finding those props and sets and costumes and the realism of it was easier. Now those are museum pieces, to try and find them. So I think at this point, to try and create something with the original cast would be very tough, because where do you put us? Do you put us in the 80s? I mean, who wants to see the Waltons in the 80s? I don't. How do you create something? I mean, I think that was a problem with some of our later reunions, specials, is they weren't about the family in the same way, and the dynamics between the family were different. We were scattered all over. So I think it would take some really special story writing to create something that didn't just seem like let's all see what they look like now kind of a show. And that doesn't, the old fans as much as they're like, they should do one with the other cat. I mean, it's like, really, seriously, what do you do with us?
Sometimes I think you just leave things alone.
Yeah. As much fun as it would be for us to all work together again.
Oh, sure.
I don't know that our last 3 reunion specials were particularly good.
Well, we have our memory of the original series,
Yes,
and of those
yes.
first few movies, which continue to resonate today.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to chat with you and take this little stroll in and around all the curves and bends and and speed bumps along the way of my life.
We did go everywhere, didn't we?
Detours.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
Nook and cranny and whatever else.
Yeah.
But it's
A
been
few- a
enjoyed.
few side tours into the ditch and the quicksand, but back onto the path. And
That's right. We hosed ourselves off and we just kept on going with smiles on our faces. What more
Absolutely.
could you ask
Yeah,
for?
exactly.
Thank you so much, Judy.
Pleasure.